Welcome back to our series on Bach's Orgelbüchlein. Today we're looking at a Good Friday prelude. In fact, probably the most familiar of all the preludes to an organist. That is, O Mensch, bewein, dein, Sünde groß. It's a piece that we all know and love. In fact, to the extent that it gets a little bit overexposed, I think, for us, a bit like BWV 565. But that's not the case for everybody. I had the rare privilege not long ago of discussing this piece with a professional musician who was not an organist and wasn't familiar with it. And as part of that discussion, I played that very last line. And when she heard the chord, that C flat major chord, she said, "What? That stands on its head everything I thought I knew about Bach before." So this piece does still have the power to shock, even if we've heard it many times before and probably played it many times before. Now, we think that this piece is really special, but did Bach also regard it as special, or was it just another chorale prelude in the Orgelbüchlein? Well, there are several things about it, I think, which suggest that Bach also shared the view that it was a particularly special piece. First of all, there's the tempo marking. We've said before that there are 4 pieces in Orgelbüchlein which have tempo markings. There are 2 marked Adagio, 1 marked Largo, and this one with its Adagio assai. It's the only one that qualifies the tempo marking with something else. We've said before that Adagio and Largo, in a sense, aren't quite tempo markings. Certainly, Adagio in a Bach context doesn't mean the same thing as an Adagio in a Brahms context. But at the same time, even if Adagio is just a measurement of feel rather than of strict speed, to qualify it or to exaggerate it with assai, very Adagio, does mean that Bach is taking it very seriously as something which he wants us to be aware of. And then when you add to that the fact that he changes the tempo marking right at the end, or the marking Adagio, to Adagissimo, and does that at the same moment as that quite extraordinary harmonic development, that C flat major chord, that is something, so far as I can just think offhand, unparalleled in Bach. It's something which we would expect from a romantic composer, but something which we certainly don't expect from an 18th century composer. To change the tempo and at the same time to do something utterly dramatic as a means of expression. That is a very remarkable thing to do. In addition to that, we've said that Orgelbüchlein, the manuscript which we've seen, is very much a working document. So some of the pieces he has composed directly into the document, and we can see there that they're a little bit more untidy and sometimes crammed into small spaces. And some of the pieces he's composed earlier and copied into the manuscript, and those are a little bit tidier, they're a little bit more predictable. But this is the only piece where Bach has crossed out the odd bar and rewritten it. He's reworked things, and he's taken a level of care and a level of thought that he hasn't expended on most of the other pieces. So there are all kinds of things which say, yes, Bach also thought of this piece as something quite extraordinary. The hymn itself is still in the hymn book. It's quite remarkable, actually, how many of the Orgelbüchlein hymns are still in the hymn book. It suggests that Bach was really looking at the key hymns, or the ones which he used the most often, because those will have come down by tradition as ones which have remained in the most use. But the hymn nowadays, thankfully, has been shortened from its original 32 verses to only 2. But the hymn deals with the fall of man. It tells us to weep for that great sin that was, as I say, the fall of mankind in the Garden of Eden. And this great sin resulted in Christ dying on the cross. So it is a very central issue theologically that Bach is dealing with. It's rather striking too, I think, that there are two hymns which are included in Orgelbüchlein which deal with exactly that text, the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, and both of them are treated to exceptional settings in Orgelbüchlein. Both of them are very remarkable, the other one, of course, being Durchatmungsvoll. In the end, I decided that I want two different perspectives on this piece. And so we're going to have a part A and a part B. And for part B, I'm going to fly to England to interview a very distinguished musician who is both an organist and primarily a violinist. And he is going to talk to us about how playing the melody line on a solo instrument, in this case the violin, can inform the way in which we think of it when we're playing it on the organ. So that's going to be very interesting and exciting, and I'm really looking forward to going and hearing what he has to say on this subject. Unfortunately, we're both busy people, and even though this was planned some time ago, it's still another 9 weeks, I think, before we both can be in the same place at the same time. And so we'll have to wait a little bit for that part B episode. But it'll be worth the wait, I'm sure. In the meantime, from my point of view, the one thing which I find myself saying most often to students regarding this work is that although the piece obviously has to breathe, it has to have an ebb and flow, it is a very lyrical melody. Nonetheless, the way in which it is most hard-hitting emotionally is if we do not exaggerate the rubato and we don't exaggerate the emotion too much. I'm reminded a little bit of that saying which I've referred to before, in fact, in the series, that if you want to write a sad piece, you write it in a minor key, but if you want to write a really tragic, heart-rending piece, you write it in a major key, but underplay all the emotion. And that is what will build up the tension in this particular case, and that is what will make that C-flat major chord, make that adagissimo at the end even more hard-hitting, that we have been waiting, we've been building up an obvious tension in this piece. One of the temptation that we face, all of us, when we're playing this, is to play it in a beautifully dreamy manner, as though we're dozing gently on a boat in a quiet lake. And that too, I think, misses the point a little bit. There needs to be almost a tear behind the eye. Certainly, as I say, when you reach that C-flat major chord. But even before that, there needs to be a sense of gravity, a sense of anxiety. But we'll find out how to deal with that melodic line, and I think we'll get a very different perspective on performing this particular melodic line in our part B in a few weeks. Just a quick note on ornaments. In our episode on ornaments, we mentioned that ornaments have different functions in different kinds of pieces. And in this particular piece, the function of the ornaments primarily is to add tension and impetus to a slow melodic line. And in that sense, the ornaments are going to be slightly more deliberate than they often are. The ornaments are all in the melodic line. They're mostly trills with a handful of mordents, and one or two of the trills have falls leading into them. A surprising number of the trills are preceded by the upper auxiliary of the trill, which always creates a problem. How do we deal with that? Given the slow tempo and the sighing nature of the piece, it's very natural to tie the previous note over into the upper auxiliary so that we get that sense of falling into the trill. And that's what I'm doing in nearly all cases. There are, I think, 3 places where I would start the trill on the main note because there isn't time to do anything else. So the first trill in bar 7, I think, for example, is one case. The second trill in bar 15, I want there on that descending scale to pair the notes in order to place a little emphasis on that C, and therefore I will start again the trill on the main note in order to do that. Bach sometimes writes TR for a trill and sometimes that squiggly line, and there doesn't appear to be a good reason to differentiate between the two. So if you look at bars 2 and 5, for example, you can see that he uses the 2 different signs in exactly the same context. So he doesn't seem there to be distinguishing between the two. Tempo, I've said already a little bit about tempo, and that Adagio assai really indicates to us, I think, that Bach is wanting us to hold back. And there is something very special about this piece, and it really asks for a slow tempo. But if we look at the scales in bars 9 and 10, for example, they really need a sense of direction. So the tempo mustn't be so slow that we lose the impetus and we lose the sense of direction and the aiming for the cadence on those scales. Registration is going to be quiet and intense. I often play this on a sesquialter because it gives a certain sharp edge, a certain anxiety, while yet being beautiful. An oboe does the same thing if it's a good oboe. It's perfectly possible, though, to play it on 2 contrasting 8-foot stops, and in this particular case, on this instrument today, that's the best solution. So I'm going to use 2 different 8-foot sounds. It's one of the great delights of this piece that so many different registrations work, and each new registration that you try brings fresh insights to the piece.